I think her name was Anna. It's difficult for me to remember her name because most people simply referred to her by her nickname. Of course, we never actually called her by that name to her face because it was a nickname based upon the way she smelled. I knew her back in the 80s. We ran into each other at various different protest rallies or in meetings of advocacy groups. She was part of many of the groups that I belonged to. Anna was an old hippie long before there were old hippies. She always wore sandals, a colorful peasant dress, and her long gray hair was always tied up in a bun on the very top of her head. Despite all her funky attire, Anna wore a kind of elegance which allowed her to kind of waft into any room and immediately command everyone's attention. She was an absolute powerhouse, determined to seek justice for the oppressed, whether they be members of First Nations or women struggling for equal pay, the homeless seeking shelter, or banning the bomb. I remember going to my very first Earth Day rally, not because I was concerned about the environment back then in the 80s, but simply because Anna badgered a bunch of us into going with her. Anna never shut up about her many causes, so much so that people would scatter when they knew Anna was coming into a room, lest she shame us into working for justice for this group or that group of people who needed our advocacy. To this day, I'm guessing that, like me, everyone else who knew her was afraid of Anna. Fortunately, we always knew when Anna was coming simply because her smell arrived long before she did. It also lingered long after she had left. As I say, I never did call her by her nickname to her face, nor did I ever hear anyone else use that name in her presence. But when her smell indicated that she was about to sweep into a room, or after we were left basking in her scent long after she had departed, that is when we used Anna's nickname. To us, Anna was not so affectionately known as Coco. Now, when I first heard Coco, I didn't understand until an old gentleman quietly explained to me Coco, as in Coco Chanel. Now, my blank, uncomprehending stare encouraged him to go on to explain that Anna's unmistakable smell came from her liberal application of Chanel No. 5. I didn't know much about perfume back then. I still don't know much about perfume, but one thing I did know is that Chanel No. 5 was expensive. Some of you are nodding. The only reason I knew this was because of all those cheap perfume bottles I would buy to give to my mother and to my aunties. Chanel No. 5 was way out of my price range. I usually went for the larger bottles, the less expensive perfumes. You know, the gift sets where you get more bang for your buck. A big bottle of Yardley. Remember Yardley? With some dusting powder thrown in for good measure. Those small bottles of Chanel No. 5, they couldn't fool me. I remember thinking at the time how odd it was for the ever frugal Anna to buy such an expensive perfume. I mean, Anna was into recycling long before recycling was a thing. She never bought anything new, and everything was always on the cheap. For Anna to be wasting her money on expensive little bottles of perfume, which she liberally splashed all over herself, well, it just didn't make sense, especially when she was always complaining about how she couldn't afford to get her hair cut. And what about all those causes she was always collecting money for? Surely her money would be better spent fighting for justice. All those justice causes she could not shut up about. Cocoa was our way of making fun of Anna's extravagance. Cocoa's extravagance is one of the reasons why I love the parable of Jesus' anointing as it is recorded by the anonymous gospel storyteller we call John. The way John tells this parable, it takes place 6 days before Jesus' last celebration of the Passover. John puts it like this: Jesus went to Bethany, the village of Lazarus, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. There they gave a banquet in Jesus' honor, at which Martha served. Lazarus was one of those at the table. Mary brought a pound of costly ointment, pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus, wiping them with her hair. The house was full of the scent of the ointment. Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, the one who was to betray Jesus, protested. Why wasn't this ointment sold? It could have brought nearly a year's wages, and the money could have been given to the poor. Jesus did not say this because he was concerned for poor people. Judas did not say this because he was concerned for poor people, but because he was a thief. He was in charge of the common fund and would help himself to it. So Jesus replied, "Leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial. You have poor people with you always, but you won't always have me." Thanks to Coco, this parable and the word extravagance are intimately entwined within me. Extravagance in the face of danger, extravagance in the face of poverty. Of all the stories which this anonymous gospel storyteller could have told about Jesus, why did he tell this one? And why did he tell it the way that he told it? What is the storyteller trying to tell us about the character of Jesus? I've studied this passage for decades, and I'm still surprised at how full and lush and how extravagant the details of this story are. I'm also aware that most of those lush and oh so extravagant details are all too often lost on 21st century ears. We are not first century Jews, so the pungency of this particular extravagance can all too easily elude us. There are details that first century Jews would have been overcome by, details that we need to sniff out if we want to smell the pungent aroma of the spikenard, which oozes, soothes, and anoints the feet of the one we claim to follow. This story has but a dozen sentences, but each and every sentence positively oozes with details which can open us to a kind of extravagance of our own. 6 days before the Passover, every first century Jew would have understood clearly that 6 days before the Passover, the biggest festival of the year, right then and right there, the roads and the pathways would have been crowded with people heading towards Jerusalem to celebrate. Jesus, too, would have been on his way to Jerusalem, and each and every one of the anonymous gospel storyteller's listeners would have known all too well what happened to Jesus in Jerusalem. They, like us, knew exactly what kind of execution awaited the political troublemaker, the justice-seeking radical Jesus, was about to encounter. Bethany, a small town just outside of Jerusalem, 6 days before the Passover, and we all know that Jesus will not be passed over. Jesus will be just like a lamb to the slaughter when the Romans are done with him. There will be no exodus for Jesus, no blood upon the lintels to save him. 6 days before Passover, Jesus went to Bethany, the village of Lazarus, whom Jesus raised from the dead. Lazarus, with his sisters Martha and Mary, are the only 3 people in the New Testament who earn the distinction of being named as people Jesus loved. Lazarus, the rumors were ripe about Jesus raising Lazarus from the tomb. There they gave a banquet in Jesus' honor at which Martha served. Martha served. They would have heard of Martha's service before. But do not think of housework, as many of us were trained to think. Martha is not a housewife, nor is she concerned with her housework. The Greek word for service here is diakonia, and you ought to be aware of the word that we get from diakonia, deacon. At the end of the first century, the Greek word diakonia is a technical term used to refer to church leadership, particularly at table. Martha, at the end of the first century, would have been a name which the storyteller's listeners would have been familiar with because Martha was a leader among the followers of the way. Martha was an apostle. Martha presided at the Passover meal, the most important Jewish religious ritual of the first century. Mary brought a pound of costly ointment, pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus, wiping them with her hair. Mary, one of the 3 people named in the Bible as being loved by Jesus. Remember that. Mary of Bethany, Jesus' beloved. The woman the gospel storyteller's listeners would have remembered because Jesus praised her for concerning herself with Jesus' teaching. Mary, a student, a disciple of Jesus, interrupts the most important Jewish ritual of the year with a pound of costly ointment. Pure nard, spikenard, incredibly expensive, a whole year's wages. Pungent. The smell would have been overpowering. All eyes on Mary, a woman, her hair down. First century listeners would have something to say about a woman in the company of men with her hair down. She lets her hair down. No honorable woman would do such a thing, and with the pungent smell of an expensive spikenard permeating the room, Mary proceeds to wipe Jesus' feet with her hair, his feet. She pours perfume on Jesus' feet. His feet, an important detail here. His feet. Mary is touching Jesus' feet. This would have caused tongues to begin to wag. In the Hebrew scriptures, the word for a man's feet is often used as a euphemism for another part of the male anatomy, which even now modesty prevents me from mentioning in church. Those first century listeners would have been wondering, his feet? Does the storyteller mean Jesus' feet, or does he mean Jesus' feet? You know what I'm talking about here, feet. A woman who Jesus loves, pours a year's worth of wages over Jesus' feet and then has the audacity to wipe the oil with her hair. Wait just a minute. You mean to tell us that she anointed Jesus' feet with oil, his feet, in the middle of a religious ritual, his head maybe? People do that for kings, but not the feet. Only the dead have their feet anointed with oil. What is the gospel storyteller trying to tell us about Jesus? The house was full of the scent of ointment. Nard is not the only thing which smells here. Judas Iscariot, the one disciple, the one who was to betray Jesus, Judas protested. Judas Iscariot, by the end of the first century, the very mention of Judas Iscariot would have raised the hackles of any audience who knew of the execution of Jesus at the hands of the Romans. The Romans who had, by the end of the first century, executed tens of thousands in Palestine, destroyed the temple, burnt Jerusalem to the ground, and sent each and every Jew and follower of the way into exile. The name Judas Iscariot had, in just a few short decades, become synonymous with the word betrayer. Whether or not Judas Iscariot actually existed or was simply, as our friend Jack Spong taught, simply a literary character designed to stand in for every betrayer who ever betrayed anyone, you can be sure that the gospel storyteller's audience would have perked up at the mere mention of Judas' name. Just imagine the audacity of this character, selling Jesus out for 30 pieces of silver. And here he is protesting the use of a costly ointment as if he cares about the poor. Why wasn't this ointment sold? It could have brought nearly a year's wages and the money given to the poor. Even the gospel storyteller can't keep the pretense up when he adds, Judas didn't say this because he was concerned for poor people, but because he was a thief. He was in charge of the common fund and would help himself to it. And all these centuries later, we can hear them sniggering, Judas worried about the poor? Pull the other one. It is at this point that the anonymous gospel storyteller shows just what kind of storyteller he or she was when she or he has Jesus say, "Leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial." We know that Jesus is about to die, and Mary is doing what needs to be done. The problem is not the ritual. The problem is the extravagance of the ritual. Leave her alone. She did this in preparation for my burial. Here's the rub. The gospel storyteller has Jesus of all people say, "You have the poor with you always, but you do not always have me." Jesus, the champion of the poor, can he really be saying, don't worry about the poor because the poor aren't going away? Of course he's not saying that. Jesus was, is, and forevermore shall be a Jew. The anonymous gospel storyteller was Jewish. The first century audiences would have been Jewish or God-fearers who were Jews in all but circumcision. The few Gentiles in the group would have been schooled in the Hebrew scriptures. What our 21st century ears rarely hear is the echo of the scriptures, which would have sounded loudly and clearly in the minds of first century listeners. Remember, Jews learned their scriptures by heart. They could recite the words of Deuteronomy in the same way we can recite the words of commercial jingles. So hear what they would have heard when they heard the words, "You have the poor with you always." Hear the words of the 15th chapter of the book of Deuteronomy. "If there is among you anyone in need, a member of your community, in any of your towns within the land that Yahweh is giving you, Do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. You should rather open your hand willingly, lending enough to meet the need, whatever it may be. Be careful that you do not entertain a mean thought, thinking the seventh year of remission is near, and therefore view your needy neighbor with hostility and give nothing. Your neighbor might cry to Yahweh against you, and you will incur guilt. Give liberally and be ungrudging when you do so, for on this account Yahweh will bless you in all your work and in all that you undertake, since there will never cease to be some in need on the earth. I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor in your land. Now hear again the words of Jesus, the Jewish rabbi. The poor you will have with you always, but you will not have me with you always. Surely we all know exactly what to do about the poor. Enough said, take care of the poor. We know what we need to do about the poor, but we do not know what to do with Jesus. How are we to deal with Jesus? What are we to do about Jesus? Poverty and extravagance, two realities. What are we who claim to follow Jesus to do about poverty and extravagance, injustice and extravagance, war and extravagance, resistance and extravagance, justice seeking and peacemaking and extravagance? Well, I can tell you what we're not supposed to do. We're not supposed to deal with the poor as if we don't have enough to help the poor. All too often we act as if we are poor ourselves, as if we can't afford to help. We are among the wealthiest people on the planet, and still we worry about whether or not we can afford to help our neighbor. We earn more than our ancestors could ever dream of earning. We have more than our forebears ever had, and still we want to pay less tax. And we want to spend less money for the common good. We live as if we scarcely have enough to get by, let alone to help a neighbor or to follow Jesus into the streets to feed the hungry and to heal the sick. We have all been trained to worry and to be conservative and to act like tomorrow it will all be taken away from us. It's not really in our nature to be extravagant. Greed, on the other hand, greed seems to come easily to us. And yet, just look at the extravagance of creation. Every single time I see a flower, I'm blown away by creation's extravagance. Just one variety of flower would have been enough. Half a dozen varieties of flowers would have been wondrous. But the sheer number of varieties and colors is positively extravagant. We are surrounded by such beautiful, pungent, extravagant examples of the wealth which creation exudes, which we partake of each and every day. Yes, we are called to be good stewards of our many blessings, but we are also called to breathe deeply and feel the soothing, healing balm which our blessings are to each of us. Yes, the poor will always be with us, but we know what we're supposed to do about the poor, so let's just take care of the poor. Let's make that a given. We have more than enough to take care of everyone's needs. We can well afford to welcome refugees. We also have more than enough to breathe deeply of our blessings and be extravagant with the poor and extravagant with all those who, like Jesus, won't always be with us. Life is not only precious, life is short. I remember a potluck picnic on the beach. It was after a long protest march for a cause I have long since forgotten. Anna and I were sitting on a log, staring out at the sun, which was just beginning to set. We had just finished an extravagant meal. People were milling around, sipping wine, and beginning to strategize about how to achieve justice for whoever or whatever cause urgently needed our attention. Anna leaned over to me and she pointed to the others. She said, they think that I don't know what they say about me when I'm not around. I didn't have the courage to respond. Anna stood up and she smiled down at me and she untied her long gray hair and she proceeded to take off her clothes. Standing there, stark naked, Anna, the wise old hippie, she shook her head and her hair went all over the place and she said, remember, life is too short to worry what anybody thinks about you. I may be just Coco to them, but I am also Anna, bathed in the scent of a woman who understands what it means to be alive. So Coco I am, and Coco I shall be. Anna began to twirl around, a kind of dance, which she accompanied with a litany of sorts, a litany of thanksgiving. She gave thanks for the beauty of the sun, the majesty of the ocean, the sweet smell of the salt air, the gentle breezes kissing her skin, the shortness of our life, the splendor of wisdom, and the freedom to enjoy it all. And when Anna's twirling stopped, she leaned down and she kissed my cheek. Enjoy it all. Enjoy it all. Life is short. Remember, we don't have much time, and that's as good a reason as any to enjoy it all. Then Anna straightened up, and she offered her naked breasts to the gentle breezes, and she shouted to the others, this Coco is going for a swim. Who's with me? With that, Coco turned toward the setting sun and led us into the embrace of creation. Enjoy it all. Enjoy it all. Life is very short. We don't have much time, and that's as good a reason as any to enjoy it all. All the extravagant blessings showered upon us. Enjoy. Then be about the work of justice seeking and peacemaking. Then give as extravagantly as you have been given. Enjoy.